Now we're going to bring up somebody who's very special to me. Her name is Sheridan Hendrix. And she's not only a TikToker, but she's a reporter. She's also one of our coaches for today. And she's going to talk about friendship in the age of COVID. That's not what your title was, but that's what I can remember from it. So that's what it's supposed to be, friendship in the age of COVID. Come on up.
In February of 2020, I was blissfully strolling through antique stores in San Diego with my new husband, Dustin. We were on our honeymoon, enjoying all of the uninterrupted time together and complete lack of responsibilities. We were popping in and out of all these shops that lined the ocean, just jam-packed with decades worth of odds and ends, and buying plenty of trinkets to bring back to our little apartment waiting for us in Columbus. This was the beginning of our lives together, and I was already dreaming up all of the adventures that we were going to take together when we got back to Ohio. But within 2 weeks of us getting home from our honeymoon, Ohio shut down to stop the spread of COVID-19. Instead of showing off our new rings and our relationship status with our friends and family, we were stuck at home together in the 800 square foot apartment that we had just moved into. It was not necessarily the beginning to my marriage that I was expecting, but that doesn't mean that it was bad. It was actually a lot of fun at first. It was kind of like the extended honeymoon. Dustin often reminded me, you know, this is probably the most time that we are ever going to get to spend together before we retire. So let's just enjoy it, right? It's only going to be for a few weeks. We watched Tiger King and Survivor and every episode of Jeopardy on Netflix. We ate so much takeout to support our local economy, of course. I even learned how to bake bread, and it wasn't that bad. We also spent a lot of time with our next door neighbors, Austin and Maxie Sprayberry. Dustin and Austin had been friends for about 6 years at that point, and Maxie and I met once she married Austin 2 years previously. We spent a lot of our evenings out on our long shared front porch, sitting in thrifted patio chairs, drinking bourbon, listening to the eerie silence of Ohio State's campus in the middle of a pandemic, and talking about all the plans that we had for when this was all over. It was a lot of fun at first, until it wasn't. You can only play so many games of Yahtzee before you just want to rip your hair out. The novelty of being at home together all the time was starting to wear thin, and on top of that, I was figuring out how to be a wife and live with a boy, which I hadn't done in like 6 years since I lived with my dad and my brothers. Like most newlyweds, Dustin and I got into our fair share of conflict in those early days. There was, of course, the toilet seat, which was frequently up, which I would so lovingly remind him to please put down, and then an hour later it would be right back up at attention. It got to the point that I started passive-aggressively labeling the bottom of the toilet seat to beg him to put it down so that I wouldn't fall in the middle of the night if I had to go pee. And then there was the whole time spent issue. I'm the type of person that loves to ask you about your day and loves to hang out. When we were working from home together, Dustin would work in our study. I was working in the dining room, which we measured once was exactly 10 feet apart. So come 5 p.m., I'd shut my laptop and I'd look at Dustin and I'd say, "How was your day? What did you do? Tell me everything." To which he would reply, "You already know what I did. You heard every single phone call that I made. I heard every single interview that you did. There's nothing left to talk about." Dustin is a lot more introverted than I am, so he wanted his space at the end of the day. But when you only share 800 square feet, there's only so much space to go around. I would go to the living room, he would go to the bedroom, and even though they shared a wall, it was about the best that we could do for one another. The reality of living in a pandemic was really starting to sink in, and I'm sure that I don't have to tell everyone in this room and remind us of how difficult those early days were. The loneliness, the frustration, the anger, the sadness, the uncertainty. But one emotion that I was not expecting to feel was jealousy. You see, outside of my pandemic pod, I'd been trying to take weekly walks with friends when the weather allowed. And it was great just to be able to be 6 feet apart from someone that you weren't with 24/7 and sharing walls with. But as we learned more and more about the virus, eventually Dustin asked me to stop going on those walks for the time being because my friends that I was seeing had loved ones they lived with who were in healthcare. So while I understood and respected the ask, and while I certainly didn't want to get sick, it was still really difficult. I felt really jealous and frustrated because while I was sitting inside at night, Dustin could be outside hanging out on the front porch with Austin. And while I love Austin and Maxie, at that point I viewed them as Dustin's friends more than my friends. I felt like Dustin had his people in his life and I couldn't. So I sat in my feels like this for a few days before I finally saw a sign, literally. There is a church that I often drive by on my way home, and one day I stopped in the middle of this empty street and I just looked to my left because I saw something new. Propped up against the large wooden cross outside of the church was this sign. Someone had painted a bright blue state of Ohio and a dark blue heart on the inside, and it said, "In this together." And I don't know what it was about that sign, but I just lost it. I cried in my car. I cried the entire way home. I sat in our back lot behind our apartment just weeping because I had this realization that even though I felt so lonely, I wasn't actually that alone. There's this proverb that reads, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." And if a global health crisis is not a time of adversity, then goddamn it, I don't know what is. I think it's really easy for us to forsake the community that is right in front of us, to take for granted what we have until it's gone, and to ignore the people in our life who are right in front of us when we are longing for something else. For me, when I felt in that moment, when everything was being ripped away from me, I felt like God still gave me someone, and that person was Maxie. Maxie was the friend that I needed when I needed a friend. So I started to confide in her the way that Dustin confided in Austin. We would talk about our marriages and our family and our friends. We talked about the annoyance of having the toilet seat up, even when we asked for it to be put down. Maxie is a lot more like Dustin, more introverted than I. So it was helpful talking with her and hearing her say, you know, I need space too at the end of the day. I need a little bit of alone time to feel recharged. It made me not want to internalize those feelings as much, but instead be like, yeah, Dustin, I want to give you your space. I want you to feel like the best version of yourself. It is so easy to be Maxie's friend because of the care that she gives for others, and I'm still so grateful that I've gotten to benefit from it and continue to benefit from it. So by early April 2020, we realized, well, this is going to go on a lot longer than we all thought. And with gathering with our families for Easter completely out of the question, the four of us decided that we would just have Easter together. So we baked a ham and way too many side dishes. I made my mom's carrot cake recipe. And the four of us hung out around my dining room table with its chipping veneer, eating and talking, listening to 90s pop music, and just like reflecting on this wild moment that we were all getting to live in together. In my dining room, around my table, we were what we needed in that moment. We were community, we were fellowship, and we were able to give each other a little bit of fun and respite from this crazy world that we were in. And that's not to say that that hasn't continued. Austin and Maxie have never just served us. This was and remains a symbiotic relationship. In the last 2 years, as the pandemic has ebbed and flowed, as we have celebrated and traveled together, as we have lost loved ones and dealt with some really serious family situations, the four of us have continued to be this community that we so needed for each other in that time. And 3 years later, we're still doing Easter together. This year we made breakfast, and Maxie bought all of these multicolored plastic Easter eggs that we hid all over the yard for the boys to find. It was a lot of fun. Dustin won by 1 egg. We're very proud of him. After 2 years of being next door neighbors, we've joked with each other that we can never not be neighbors again. We've been through too much. We've seen too much together. So while it is impossible for any of us to buy a home in this economy right now, it has not stopped us from sending each other Zillow listings whenever we see houses right next door to each other or across the street. And as Dustin and I have continued to dream up all the adventures that we plan to take throughout our life together, so many of them include our friends and our neighbors, Austin and Maxie.